here is hit them where it hurts. And, you know, as the government has said, the Prime Minister has said, your defense experts have said that we will look at all the options militarily, diplomatically as well. Options are being looked at. What about economically? That's something that we need to focus on as well. Because remember, there is a huge trade deficit between India and China, with the balance not being in our favor. We are dependent, and that is the sad true fact, on China for a host of products. In fact, most of the smartphones we use, apps we use are Chinese. So there is this whole slogan today, right? Boycott Chinese apps, boycott Chinese goods. That's easier said than done. We need a game plan if we have to hit them where it hurts. And when it comes to India and China, the true hard fact is that the diplomatic and the trade relation is intricately interlinked. So we're going to speak on all aspects in this next part of the conversation. I'm joined now by Leela K. Ponappa, former career diplomat and Deputy NSA, Jayan Das Gupta, former ambassador to the WTO, in fact, so great perspective there on the trade relations, and Manoj Joshi, distinguished fellow ORF. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us today on the show. Mr. Joshi, let me just get your take first on the strategic implications of what we've seen in the last 24 hours. So now in the last 24 hours, we learned that the casualties on the Indian side have been higher than was initially known. We know for a fact that there are casualties on the Chinese side. There's been no official word on what those numbers are. The Prime Minister has come and given a strong message. The two foreign ministers have spoken, and then two sets of communication have gone out with differing versions, as we often see in such situations. In your view, where does the situation stand now? Does it seem there is a will to move forward and de-escalate, calm things down? And can we really take the Chinese at their word for it?
Well, I think not the Chinese at their word, but the fact of the matter is that on Saturday, the army chief told us that a disengagement process had begun, and in North beginning in the north from Galwan. On Monday, this incident has happened. My own inclination, therefore, is that this is a local situation, that the two sides at a broader level had agreed to disengage. Now, if something has gone wrong in between, I think it's incumbent on them to take it at a higher level. And if the ministers have spoken to each other, of course, that's a plus point. But there is also the NSA. He's a special representative. He needs to talk to his counterpart. Actually, the NSA is seen as the anchor of Sino-Indian relations, meaning from their side, their special representative, Yang Jiechi. So I think it needs to be kicked up progressively. And you need higher level political intervention in the situation. And I think it's possible for that to happen.
Ambassador Ponappa, do you agree with their view that it's time to escalate it even further? And first of all, what is our starting point? What is our starting point? Because, you know, our version of events is very clear that the intrusion was from the Chinese side. We decided on a number of points to de-escalate. They didn't stick to what they were supposed to do, and that's where the altercation started from. The Chinese, of course, have a different version. So how do we move ahead from this point?
This isn't the first time that we hear of an incident like this being a local situation. Think back to a few years ago when you had the Depsang situation. There again, we were told, oh, it was an adventurous colonel who sort of decided to do things, and so on and so forth. There have been at least two major visits where India really had to put its foot down and say either there is withdrawal or the visit is off. I would disagree with Manoj that this is a local incident, not just because of the nature of the violence that took place on Monday night, but also because of the nature of the different locations where we have faced untimely Chinese intrusions. In fact, I think this is part and parcel of a much larger Chinese objective. Now, for years, we heard about how mechanisms were going to deal with matters at the border, that colonels, brigadiers would sort things out. The brigadiers have been talking for many, many days and nothing has happened. So it got jacked up to the level of a lieutenant general from our side, talking to one rank below to a major general on the Chinese side. Now we've had the two foreign ministers talk about this, although they are not involved in military operations. So no, I don't think this should be jacked up in order to solve the problem, because this is something that is much bigger than just a localized incident. It is tragic that so many lives have been lost, certainly for us, and I dare say for many Chinese families as well. But I think we need to see what is happening over here. There's no question that this is creeping aggression. China is trying to see how far it can push India. And I think India has taken a firm position this time. There is a price that has been paid, of course, but then that is the nature of these things. But we need to take a much larger view of what China's intentions and objectives and methods are.
Yeah, so, I was having a conversation a little while earlier with former Army Chief General Bikram Singh, and his view is that the Chinese administration is looking for a distraction in the middle of a lot of things back home. So that may or may not be the case. I want to also come to a very important aspect of the India-China relationship. And Mr. Dasgupta, let me come to you with this part, which is the trade aspect. I mean, the fact is that we are heavily dependent on China for a lot of goods and produce. They need our market. We need to hit them where it hurts. While there is, it suddenly becomes a WhatsApp trend of boycott this and boycott that. I want to understand from you clearly if there is a glide path to making sure that this factor doesn't come in the way when we have to deal with China, that, we need them for investments, for goods, for products.
It's a very complicated question, but I would like to, break it up into small parts. The first point is that, China has approximately $70 billion worth of exports to India. And India's exports are roughly between $15 and $16 billion. So the trade surplus that China has is increasing every year, and it's around $55 billion. If you add Hong Kong to it, it's another $5 billion, so $60 billion. And India's exports are, just about $315 billion, and of which China takes about $15-16 billion. So this is going to be unsustainable. And this was one of the reasons why India could not conclude the RCEP negotiations. It was primarily on account of China. So that having been said, how do we tackle the Chinese imports which are coming in? And can we classify them into, let's say, three categories? The first one is, capital goods. For instance, solar panels. We buy more than $3.5 billion worth of solar panels. We need it for our own environmental, safety and to wean our industry away from thermal power. The second issue is about finished products like, let's say, fertilizers.
Yes.
There are other finished products also. For instance, consumer goods, durable consumer goods like air conditioners, refrigerators, and television sets, etc. Now, we don't really need those. We can perhaps, not import in the same measure, or we can also think of slowing down. The third and very important component of our imports is the intermediate products and components. And to start with, even the RT-PCR test reagents for COVID-19 are imported from China. Then 70% of our active pharmaceutical ingredients come from China, which form a very important part of the drug manufacturing process in India and its exports as well. The electronic industry, in everything there is a chip or something else which goes in.
Yes.
That is heavily dependent on Chinese imports, as well as the mobile phone industry. Finally, the auto industry. I heard the other day the chairman of Maruti Udyog saying that we don't buy much from China, but our vendors do buy components from China. So did Mr. Bajaj about his motorcycles and the components. So, and he said that Bajaj industry apparently exports about 15,000 crores worth of motorcycles. And a part of it comes from China. So there are
So I want to get this perspective. Let me get Ambassador Ponnappa, and you've explained it really well, Mr. Dasgupta. But the fact is, Ambassador Ponnappa, it's not just India, right, who imports all of these things from China. It's pretty much the rest of the world that is dependent on the Chinese for a lot of these products, including the United States, where Donald Trump is right now trying to give them a very hard time. So where is our give? There is a give and take, right? What is our bargaining chip?
You see, now when you strategize on matters of trade, it's not going to happen overnight. You can't have a knee-jerk reaction that because we've had this border incident, therefore you're going to cut off all things. Also, trade has its own logic and momentum and flows. And at the best of times, there's a certain magic in trade by which goods reach different markets from different places. And ideally, that is the kind of relationship that should exist even with a country like China. But I think where Ambassador Dasgupta has made his point is that, you know, I think Indian business ran to China, as did business from many other countries. I personally saw this happen in California in the early 80s, where because of the price differences, because of the price benefits, really it was like a rush of lemmings towards getting supplies from China. Because the numbers made sense, but nobody thought of the big picture. Today, we are in the midst of this pandemic. There are questions, frankly, about where and how the virus originated. People are beginning to be a little more uncomfortable with the rise of China than they were even earlier, both on the economic and on the strategic fronts, given China's very assertive and even aggressive behavior in many theaters, not just on our borders, but certainly in the South China Sea, in the East China Sea, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, there are many areas where it was not necessary to buy from China. And we've seen how many small industries in India, you take footwear, for example, or certain other components of household goods, and even Banarasi brocade, where because of the price differential, China has been allowed in. And at the other end, you have investment. Trade is one aspect, but investment is the other. And when you have technology that is not fostered in India, I mean, we've seen software applications come out during the pandemic because it was felt that we needed to have our own products. Yeah. Why could it not be done earlier? Solar panels, it was a greenfield area some decades ago, but today China supplies the world. I mean, these are areas where the environment has to be created within India for Indian entrepreneurs and Indian technologists to produce that Indian product. It isn't enough to say so. You need the policies, the tax structures to enable that.
My point is, do we have that kind of timeline? Mr. Joshi, I want your perspective on this. And I know you focus more on the diplomatic side of it, and the strategic part of it. But don't you think that they are interlinked? I mean, look at the clashes we've had over 5G technology, over Hawaii. And it's all part of the bigger picture. We also need a kind of timeline to become Atmanirbhar. But the Chinese are, you know, at our back right now.
You know, Tamanna, in fact, I have just published a major paper in the ORF on this whole issue of supply chains and decoupling and deglobalization. And frankly, it's a very tall order. Meaning, if I just look at some of the figures I have, China produced 24% of world's power, 28% of automobiles, 41% of the world's ships, 50% of the refrigerators, over 60% of color TVs, 80% of air conditioners and computers, 90% of mobile phones, and half the world's steel. And this is just what they have produced. The problem is the supply chains, because most people, and I think Mr. Dasgupta has brought it out very well, that it's all right for an automobile manufacturer to say, you know, we can do without China, but he doesn't know that his suppliers, meaning often most manufacturers are unaware of the various levels of there are something like 20 levels in a supply chain. You know, the US, for example, now they've been talking of medicines, etc., to be, they're saying it should be made in the US. But you see, it's not just medicines and it's not just APIs. Behind the APIs, there are chemicals and mining you mine something, you process something. And the problem is that these industries left the US because of environment issues. The US didn't want these chemical industries in the United States, so they went to China. So the point is that there are various parts of the supply chain where China is controlling things virtually from the mine, to the product. Meaning, we see this in electrical vehicles. They own the mines in Democratic Republic of Congo, and they've got it all the way. They're producing some 50–60% of the world's lithium-ion batteries. So the point is, it's extremely complex web, and it's not something which can be done overnight. And Ambassador Ponappa is right about that. But the problem is that as far as India is concerned, we are nowhere near the starting line. Automobile is just about one area where we have some kind of sophistication in the system. But as Ambassador Dasgupta himself pointed out, that the tail, the intermediate products that are required for the components still leads back to China.
No, so then my question is, like we highlighted earlier, India is not the only one with this problem and this realization that the Chinese are using their manufacturing capabilities to throw their weight around in the world, right? Ambassador Ponappa, is that sort of what we need to look at now? Who are the other nations who are finding themselves in a similar position? Is that where this conversation is eventually going to go?
Well, I think it functions at two levels. One is the whole production and supply chain that both Manoj and Jayant Dasgupta have talked about. But I think the other also has to do with national policies. Now, you take power equipment. There was a time when the specifications that were put out in Government of India tenders did not match the production line of BHEL, but suited Chinese suppliers. There was a time when the tariffs on the import of power equipment, and some of it really of questionable quality, for Chinese power equipment were lower even than what the WTO prescribed as a floor. Now, this has nothing to do with supply chains. It has to do with government policies. And I am entirely with Manoj that you cannot do this overnight, because you have to, but you've got to have a strategy. And you've got to have long-term planning. You've got to decide what areas you are going to encourage. Now, the Americans have gone through this in the 80s when they felt they were being swamped by Japan. And you had some of the big IT companies, IBM, Texas Instruments, Motorola, and so on, trying to come together in order to say, well, the US has to develop the technology so that we don't get taken over by Japan. But China was waiting in the windows and in the shadows. And they sort of have really come forward with a huge technological presence, some of which is also over here, because Huawei started in India as an R&D enterprise and not as the major commercial and telecom enterprise that it is today. Then you have things like PMA, the kind of access that Indian companies should have to government purchasing. Why do Indian companies sometimes have to struggle to get even public sector undertakings to honor this kind of commitment? So there is the aspect of the actual economics of production and supply, which will take time, but there are certain other aspects of government policy, which I think can be done in a much shorter time frame.
So what would be the impact of these, Mr. Dasgupta? Because that's important to look at as well. Today we have, this conversation devolving to the level of what apps should be, removed from your phone and what products you should and should not buy. But this kind of an approach where we focus more on Indian companies, what would be the impact on quality of products and goods, quality of investment flowing into India as well?
There are a few things which need to be cleared up. For instance, the Chinese have, it's been estimated they have invested about $8 billion or slightly more. But they have invested mostly in technology companies. So if you talk of Flipkart, if you talk of Paytm, OYO, Ola, Cabs, all of these have Chinese investments. So are you going to boycott them as well? Because they have large Indian shareholdings as well. So it is a very difficult choice to make if we come down to that level. Now, if we confine ourselves to, let's say, the things which we can make And I entirely agree with the earlier two speakers, Ambassador Ponnappa and Joshi. We need to strategize. We can't do everything at the same time in, let's say, 1 year or 2 years. And the government has taken the right decision in this regard. The production-linked incentive scheme, for instance, for the electronics and mobile sector, worth about 40,000 crores, that is meant to actually substitute for the huge imports that are taking place in electronics components and in mobile phones. Similarly, a 7,000 crore package has been rolled out for manufacturing APIs, for encouraging APIs to be made in India. Now, that is the kind of thing, we can't do it across the board for everything, but we need to put in money. We need to put in a lot of research and development, because without that, we will not be able to match the Chinese or be globally competitive. So these are two of the things. And of course, the infrastructural deficit. And in order to attract foreign investment and technology to come in, let's say non-Chinese, we will have to roll out the red carpet. We will have to make things easier for them. If a company comes in and has to run around for 20 clearances, 30 clearances.
I mean, these are legacies.
So these are the things which will need to be taken care of. And there is no tomorrow, we can't say that we'll do it in 5 years or 10 years time. We have to do it now. So these are the things which are the imperatives.
Yes, Ambassador Ponnappa, you wanted to add on to that point.
Yeah, I think the significance of what has happened in the past few days is really that it provides us with the occasion and the compulsion to review the whole nature of our relations with China, as well as to try to put in place many of the mechanisms that Ambassador Dasgupta has talked about, in order to really put our money where our mouth is. It's all very well to state an objective saying that this is what we're going to do, we're going to become leaders in technology, blah, blah, blah. But there is a certain process that is involved. And it is tortuous because it means you've got to get everybody on board, not just the top person, but the bottom person, the person down the line who is going to either facilitate or hamper a particular enterprise. You cannot have, we talk about rolling out the red carpet for investment. We talk about improvement about India's ease of doing business and so on and so forth. But I think there is still a long way to go for business, Indian or otherwise, to feel that India is a comfortable place to do business in, that there is no tax harassment, that I think that right now there has been certainly a flight of capital. Many Indian majors have more of their manufacturing outside rather than within India. So there's got to be development of that confidence and a development of trust, confidence, and expectation that as far as the government is concerned, it will deliver.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's a fight back on two fronts. One, of course, at the LAC, and one on reducing our economic dependence on what comes in from China, boosting our own countries. That part is very, very important as well. There has to be a plan for it, not a hashtag or a WhatsApp forward that is going to achieve it. So before you throw away things that you own, let's think of this in a clearer manner and have some clear policy direction on this front. I want to thank all of you for joining us on this big discussion. The Chinese influence in terms of investments is seen perhaps more in the startup space than anywhere else, where our major unicorns are funded by the Chinese. My colleague Chandra has all the details.
What's common between Paytm, Zomato, Big Basket and Dream11? They are some of India's leading unicorns that count Chinese investors such as Alibaba Group and Tencent as big backers. In fact, according to data compiled by Traction, 15 out of 30 unicorns in India are backed by Chinese investors. They have also backed half a dozen Soonicorns, a term used to refer to potential unicorns. While the Chinese-backed unicorns include Byju's, Paytm, Ola, Oyo, Swiggy, Zomato and Udaan, the Chinese-backed Soonicorns include Tracto, ShareChat, Meesho and Cardekho. In all, Chinese VCs have invested over $8 billion in Indian startups. China also accounted for 50% of the app downloads in India in 2018. through apps like UC Browser, ShareIt and TikTok. The government recently said that any foreign direct investment from China would be scrutinized by the government after predatory investments by Beijing in various assets around the world. With the Galwan Valley situation, the hostility is only likely to rise. While this might look like bad news in an already difficult environment for startups, Jio Platforms' record fundraise of 1 lakh crore rupees from non-Chinese investors has raised hope. Will we see American investors double down and fill the void left by China? Chandra R. Shrikant, ET Now.
We'll take a very short break at this point. When we come back,